Doek Diaries, second entry. I won't say day two because, as it turns out, last night after my first entry, I actually had a great urge to do another one, but I decided to pace myself. But I'm not closing myself off to the idea that there may be some days where there's more than one entry and some months where there's no entry at all. But hey, we'll take this as it goes. Once again, most comfortable space to do this is outside, smoke break in the dark, but it's fine. Over time, we'll get to unpack those reasons as well. And today I decided to be brave. And my bravery entails the discussion of the God question. If you're going to stick around, it's going to come up often. It's a big, huge aspect of my own self identity. And one of the biggest challenges for me raising a child is, do I bring him into my way of viewing God, which is quite complicated at best, or leave him in the comfortable space in which he was raised, in which I was raised? And currently that's the case because my mom makes sure every Sunday it's church. Doesn't matter what your mommy thinks. She raised me to know and believe in a real God, and she continues to subscribe to that God. And for me, that's why I'll never be an atheist, because honestly, without a God, I don't see myself or any of this making any sense. And this evening, I read an interesting quote by Marianne Williamson where she talks about our sense of who we are. And if your sense of who you are is only based on what you see around you, you're limited to your reality. But the moment you believe in a greater, higher, more powerful, more spectacular, more loving power, then your identity shifts and you get to believe in things that are much bigger than yourself. Interestingly, I'm currently going through Nietzsche's Will to Power um, through one of my favorite online lecturers, Jason J. Campbell, who's just taking us through very slowly and systematically through what Nietzsche speaks to and what he talks about in terms of nihilism and a whole lot of other very interesting subjects for me. But the idea that if you believe in a great ideal, if we were all to believe in that great ideal, it would collapse on itself. And life is not meant to be lived thinking things, living as though things ought to be, but seeing things as they are. And that's a huge reality for me because I'm just like raised in a very Christian home that tells you to forgive, turn the other cheek, and then growing up in post-apartheid South Africa where you're just like, we've been turning cheeks. Too many people have died turning the other cheek. Why are we still subscribing to the same notion of God? And I always tell the story, and I'm sure I've covered it in my latest book, if not more than that one. The story of when I was in Ghana at Cape Coast, where we went to the slave center, and they were telling us about the fact that during the slave trade, people were living in the dungeons and they were half immersed in water. And you can imagine the kind of atrocious conditions those were. Living in the dark, they only got to see, I think, about 30 minutes of light every day. And ironically, upstairs, there was a church. And the guard said to us, this is the best description of hell below and heaven above that he's ever seen. And I'm going to just, I don't know, talk briefly about each of the various God aspects, because for me, God could be the whole entire vlog. But they're just some of the more prominent thoughts and beliefs that I have. And the one thing from when I was at Cape Coast, in Ghana, it stood out for me that we still believe in the fact that that same guy that they were praising upstairs is our guy, who in the last kind of 400 years hasn't really seemed to have our back much. And that's quite controversial. But the reality is, one of the things in my own Doek, and I mentioned in my previous post that Doek Diaries is about things that happen underneath my head or my head wrap, as what we would wear as women in Africa. The question of God is, who is this God? And as I'm studying Nietzsche now, the question is God either not all powerful or not everywhere and able to influence everything, or does God not necessarily like you? And that's a scary thought, because we all told omnipresent, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, all these amazing omnis. And if he's all of them, something's got to give. And one of the conclusions is maybe there is a God. He is very powerful, but he's like, y'all are not my type. And I'm not that much of a pessimist. I think God likes me. I always tell my friends that. Personally, I think God likes me because of everything I've been through in my life. There's a force, there's a power there, and it's had my back in some very dicey, dodgy times. So, personally, I believe in God. I don't subscribe to the conventional Christian God. And I believe that some of the biggest chains we carry as Africans are as a result of being too caught up with the idea of one version of God. So monotheism for me doesn't quite cut it. If God made so many different types of trees, so many different types of people, animals, everything, why would his interpretation of himself be one guy who came to bring his son called Jesus in one place, in one part of the world, and we all need to subscribe to that? It doesn't quite gel for me, but it's a big part of my own upbringing. And as this vlog is about my identity as a woman, it's also about the patriarchal stance, I would say, that from which the Bible is written. One of the most powerful books I ever read is called The Shack, and in The Shack, God is a black woman. Interestingly enough, and you have to wonder about that kind of a possibility, because the first thing from day one, the Bible speaks to something that is unnatural in nature, which is the female coming from the male, whereas in all the rest of nature, the source of life is the female. And we, in African context, we speak of Mother Earth, Queen Mujaji, and a whole lot of highly exalted female deities. But in the Western context, we were taught to believe, no, God was a dude who built another dude, and from the second dude, he built the chick. To each his own. I really believe to each his own. But in my context and in my world, I feel that part of my own liberation lies in redefining God. And I think, having grown up in the family that I've grown up in and in the church that I grew up in, Anglicans are very open-minded people. We were allowed to ask certain questions and allowed to interpret God in certain ways. So as much as Christianity is very strict, Jesus was quite a rebel. Jesus walked into the church and he was like, you guys are getting it all wrong. Jesus hung out with hookers and brought wine to the party. Not that that's all he did, but he just was a more well-rounded individual. So when I explore other aspects of my religion, I don't feel like I've got the devil in me or anything, but it's more this God who built us with so many personalities and different traits would actually welcome someone who thinks differently and who uses the brain capacity he gave us to interpret the world differently. And for me, a big one, a huge one, is African spirituality. Having been to 21 African countries, I've always been interested in the indigenous religions before the big two or the big three that we now mostly subscribe to. And I was surprised when I was in Tanzania, in Zanzibar, that I think 99% of the country is Islam. And I was like, but what did people believe in before Islam? And everyone's like, who knows, who cares? This is what we all are. And that shook me a bit, because I'm like, at least back home in South Africa, we still speak about Okamagwa, Madlozi, Okoko, Mkulu. There's still room for us to explore our indigenous spirituality. And you get a lot of people these days, even in the mainstream, proudly coming out and saying, actually, I believe in my ancestors. And there I was getting caught on the balcony doing my thing. But let me continue. Um, and for me, that's not so much a rebellion, but a growing into yourself, going into your deeper spaces and into your deeper truth. And it's a space that I've been fascinated by for many years. And I once asked my gran, she's now, I think she turned 95 this year. And I was like, but gran, please explain this for me. Like, you've been around for 95 years, so I trust your judgment and all. How come we pray here and we go to church, but we also have ceremonies where shisimpepo, we burn incense, imsamo, which is in like the family shrine, and we speak to our ancestors. And I don't know if I messed with my grandmother's head, but her response was pretty simple. She was like, Africans don't praise the dead. So when you speak to those who have passed, we're not calling them God. We just know that they're now closer to God so that they can deliver our messages on our behalf. So when we're struggling, we're like, okay, God has got a lot of work on his plate with 7+ billion people in the world. But if we had someone who has whom God's ear is close to. Let me not be deep with my English. She's not my mother tongue. But if we had someone that we could speak to who could then speak to God on our behalf, then that would help our cause. So when we call on our ancestors, we know, having known them to be good people in this life, that they're also good people in the next. And as a result, we go emsamo and we burn the incense to call our ancestors, and we ask them to send our requests for us. And I like that. There was something about that was pretty genuine. Because I think whilst growing up, there was a big trend of it being considered evil to do anything African and traditional. So if you slaughter a cow and you burn incense and you call on your ancestors, it's like you're calling on evil spirits. And in my core, that just never felt right, because I'm like, guys, these people were here. They existed for thousands of years before modern Christianity came. And in my view, and especially in my more recent worldview, with my political views around the politicization of religion, it's always been like, the idea of heaven in its current state doesn't quite excite me. We're all wearing white, singing one song, like church. I like church. I like gospel music. Don't get it twisted. But I'm not about to be doing that forever, ever. And if there's a place where my ancestors went before religion came, I'm recording, then I would want to go to that place as well, rather than go to the other place where we're all wearing white and singing white people church songs. No, yeah, okay, whatever. Just singing church songs. So yeah, I decided to eat the big fish by making this a second entry, because it's a big subject in my life. And yesterday, I might have seemed a bit generic, but I also brought something that was quite major in my own world, the idea of my relationship with my son. And it wasn't very flippant the way I said it. It wasn't meant to be flippant the way I said it, that I sometimes forget it exists, because in the hustle and bustle of my day, I lose track. And I'm just like, oh my God. But I think for me, it always boils back to on a spiritual sense, he owns my heart. And when I'm thinking of him, I'm thinking, is he okay? Is he happy? Is he laughing? Is he good? Are people being nice to him? Does he feel like a good human being? I remember when I was pregnant, my biggest prayer, and I don't know why, I can never explain why, my biggest prayer was always, may he be a good person. Lord, please let me bring a good person into this world. And having met him 2 years ago, he is just the ultimate good person, so very relaxed, gets along with everybody. Now he's going through the terrible twos, but before then, and even now, he's still an absolute darling and an absolute gem. And I think the best thing to ever come out of me, beyond my writing and my words and all my whatever, yeah, the subject of religion is a big one, and I think there's a lot for us to unpack as women on who does religion say I am, because for the most part, you don't get single patriarchs, or are they matriarchs? Yeah, single women in the Bible who did great things and achieved a great deal. Women always existed in the context of men, but that's because for the most part the Bible is written by men. And then you hear the story of Ruth, and she's one of the few she rose. And then you get Jesus's mom, but also she exists in the context of Jesus's mom, Joseph's wife. But you don't get a lot of on your own as a woman, who or what am I, what's my purpose. And then you get the vilification of women, which is like your Delilah and the woman by the well, and all of those women who are portrayed in a way that shows them as us females at our worst. So I think even in terms of dialogue that we have, we need to unpack, as much as we in our spirits believe in a God and in religion, to what extent does it disempower us or even perpetuate the abuse of women or the role of a woman? And that's one of the things I've always loved about Zulu culture, where there's a term that says "Okuhlula amadoda kuyabiwa," which means when men have given up, they need to go and report. And who do they report to? And there was this one gentleman on Ukhoze FM years ago who used to talk about like various subjects of Zulu history, and he would say no, men would go and sit and have their councils and discuss, but if they found that they were stuck, at the end of that day one of the men would be like, guys, "Ukuhlula amadoda kuyabiwa," and they would all know what that means. And that means go talk it over with your woman, pillow talk, whatever we call it. And in those moments, women are not necessarily seen as the leaders, because I think for the most part in history, women aren't out there running the show, but their contribution is valued. So when men reconvene the next day, they've got different perspectives. And I might not even say that I actually got this idea from my wife, but it just shows that you value the input of women. And as a mother to a little boy, one of the things I always want him to do is value the role of women, because even in my own self-identity, I found that with myself and my peers and our parents and even our grandparents to some extent, there's this idea that women can take it all. You can beat her up, you can cheat, you can lie, you can do everything, and women have this endless supply of love to give. And that means to some extent it can be perverted, and men can then use that to say, no, she's a woman, she can take it. And that's not true. It's very much not true. And in recent times, I've seen a lot of people, a lot of women fall apart, and I've fallen apart myself, because this ideology that a woman is this strong, hard rock or a tree doesn't actually marry to reality. We do have our breaking points, and even if you are that strong, it shouldn't be for the world to test that, you know. And I found that sometimes, yeah, back to the religion question, you don't find a lot of comfort in religion beyond the best woman is the one who will be Beyonce and Oprah and Kim Kardashian and Miley Cyrus, everything rolled in one. And there's not so much of the protect and nurture and care and love the heart of a woman. One of my favorite Christian books is called Captivating, and it's all about unpacking the soul of a woman, and it talks to all girls want to be romanced, and we want to be part of a great adventure where we're the beauty that inspires the greatness in a man. Bit patriarchal, and I might get shot for some of these statements, but there's something to that, where the heart of a woman gets celebrated, where a woman is not just seen as the bottom of the food chain, the one that everybody can step on, because we know if nothing else, she always stands. And yeah, I think today I started off on religion, then I encroached onto another subject, which I may not be ready to unpack just yet, but already I've been talking for 20 minutes. So let me just end it here for tonight. Madlamini Lo, and this is Doek Diaries.